its way. All right, we're now recording. Thank you for attending today's class. This is March 31st. We'll call this part 2 of our discussion of feminism. Let's start off with some definitions, and then we'll go into what the socialist feminist believes, the radical feminist, and then the diversity feminist. In part 1 of the discussion, we went through liberal feminism, and I was asking folks a few questions about whether or not the relationships that they're in, the male female, right, the gender binary relationships that they're in, whether or not they are in fact oppressive. Let's do a definition of feminism. You'll remember with me from the earlier recording, from the earlier class last week, we said that feminism holds that women should be equal to men. The feminist believes that women should be free as men, so women should have as much autonomy as men enjoy. The feminist opposes the societal structures that put women into political, economic, social, and cultural positions of inferiority. If someone is a feminist, they are critiquing the law. They are challenging long-held beliefs. The feminist looks to confront the societal customs and works to reverse the cultural images that reinforce patriarchy. Patriarchy is the evil. Patriarchy is the problem. Here it comes, right? Patriarchy is the enemy. So the feminist believes that all people should be empowered to participate in collective decision-making. And when people are denied this power, the agency that is doing the denying is being oppressive, and this denying agency for the feminist is the patriarchal, capitalistic, white supremacist nature of society, to use the words of Bell Hooks. So we're talking about the socialist feminist, right? The socialist feminist believes that the mainstream of American society needs to be radically changed. The goal of the socialist feminist is not to bring women into a capitalist mainstream on an equal basis with men. Instead, for the socialist feminist, the goal is to radically reorganize society to adopt a socialist way of gender equality. The socialist feminist conceptualizes capitalism and patriarchy as being mutually reinforcing. You look at the slides, right? For example, a woman's lack of equal access to economic resources, which is seen statistically by indicating women's lower wages, women's lower levels of property ownership, women's higher levels of poverty and illiteracy. These statistical resources show that women lack equal access to economic resources. And this proves a woman's dependency on men, and this takes on the form of patriarchy. So you see here, looking at this third bullet point, so women suffer with low wages, and women make up the majority of those who are employed in low-wage jobs. So it is capitalism, according to the socialist feminists, it is capitalism that makes women a steady supply of cheap, exploited labor. All right. In turn, there is a social expectation that women will be taken care of by the men in their lives. So the social expectation means that men have to have higher wages, and this social expectation that women will be taken care of by the men in their lives, this justifies keeping women's wages low. And when you combine those two, right, women are going to be taken care of by men. Men need higher wages because they have to take care of women. Women can accept low wages because they don't have to take care of themselves, essentially. Then this proves that capitalism is reinforced by patriarchy to put women as a steady supply of cheap labor. All right, on a second point, the socialist feminist. I wonder if you folks have any, issues, or you want to talk about this or anything, feel free to jump right in. The socialist feminist then says that women suffer from a double day where a woman has to work outside the home for low wages. Maybe she's at a fast food place, she's at a daycare, she's doing home health, she's at an office, whatever, she's going to get paid less than men. And then the woman has to come home and work for zero wages inside the house in their role as mother to the children, in their role as wife to the husband, cooking and cleaning, maintaining the house. So the socialist feminist says that the concept of the double day reinforces the double exploitation of women, where they are exploited by the capitalist system outside the house, and they're exploited by the relationships that they're in inside the house. Remember with me your dialectics. The socialist feminist, remember we said dialectics says that the act of creation is also the act of negation. Once you have the creation of one thing, you are creating what that thing is not. And the two of them mold together to give you a complete understanding of the dynamics at work, right? So from a dialectical perspective, the socialist feminist shows that women are both necessary and exploited at the same time. How are women necessary? Women are necessary because in their role as wife and mother, they perform the work necessary to produce the next generation of workers to be exploited by the bourgeois class. Women are exploited even as they are necessary. Women are exploited because they perform the unpaid work that society has to offer, and they perform more of it in relationship to the men in their lives. The socialist feminist. All right. I hope that makes some kind of sense. I'm ready to keep on going. Let's keep on going. I want to roll, I guess. Okay, so now let's talk about the radical feminist. Now, earlier what we said is that the liberal feminist, taken in your textbook as the classic example of a liberal feminist, is Mary Wollstonecraft in 1792. She wrote this book called A Vindication of the Rights of Women. And essentially, Mary Wollstonecraft believes that society needs to be reordered, not deconstructed, but society needs to be modernized so that women can enter society on an equal footing with men. The liberal feminist does not want to destroy, does not want to, radically realter. She just wants to create change circumstances so that women can be injected into society in an equal footing. The socialist feminist wants to radically realter society. She says that incremental change is something that reinforces capitalism. So you have to completely break down the capitalist system in order to produce the change that the socialist feminist needs. Okay, the radical feminist then focuses on how men as a group have oppressed women. The radical feminist also rejects the liberal feminist, right? The radical feminist shares with the socialist feminist in opposition to mainstream institutions and politics, but there's a difference. The socialist feminist emphasizes capitalism's complicity in the furtherance of patriarchy, but the radical feminist focuses on analyzing how men as a group have oppressed women and concentrates on offering alternatives to that oppression. When you get right down to it, right, fundamentally, the radical feminist tends to view patriarchy as so thoroughly entrenched in the mainstream of most, if not all, societies on the planet, that the only recourse that a feminist has is to advocate for the fundamental or the radical alteration of the mainstream of society. Let's go to the slides. The radical feminist says that patriarchy is so fully entrenched, one more time, that the only alternative is to radically change the mainstream of society. The radical feminist says, for example, that the traditional family reproduces oppression for women because the wife is supposed to submit to the authority of the men that they get married to. You remember the classic phrase when folks get married is that the wife says she pledges to honor and obey her husband. If you are obeying someone, then you are submitting yourself to the authority of that person. You are saying, I am underneath that person. I am less powerful than that person. I'm going to obey him. Why does men do not say that they're going to obey their wives? Okay, now my wife didn't say that, but that's what I understand that happens. This is a good book, right? This book here by Barnett and McIntosh, right? McIntosh is called The Antisocial Family. And this is a good example of radical feminist thought, right? So in books like this, the radical feminist says that everyday language of society serves to reproduce the gender hierarchy, the sexual hierarchy present. Hierarchy in that one is superior to the other. No, they're not equal, so that men are seen as superior to the women in their lives. And then gender, because it's all based on societal assumptions of anatomy. So the everyday language reproduces this gender hierarchy. So you remember there's phrases like when you think of human beings, you refer to them as mankind, not womankind, but mankind. That people that are, even when a woman becomes the CEO of a corporation, they might mistakenly call her the chairman, right? That when someone is selling things, you don't say necessarily saleswoman, it is more norm of society to say chairman, right? This brings to mind the work of the radical psychologists, Anyway, all right, so according to the radical feminists, advertising reproduces patriarchy as well because women in the advertising world are reduced to the sexual playthings of men as the image of their body is constructed in such a way so as to cater to men's desires instead of affirming the strength of women. Think about the commercials that you see. The one that comes to mind right now, let me see if I can find the picture. The one that comes to mind right now are when you are selling soda. I wonder if this thing will play a video. Like if you're selling a soda, do you need to sexualize your soda, right? I don't know if there's anything by definition attractive about, soda, but look at, well, never mind. I didn't find the right one. I was just bringing up the example of the Fanta girls, right? These four young ladies, Fanta, Fanta, wanna, Fanta, Fanta, right? They're singing soda, and they've got on, let's say they have revealing clothes on. That's just an example of advertising reproducing patriarchy because they're depicting women as gender playthings. More. So, in the effort to criticize the mainstream views on sexuality, the radical feminist is going to draw on queer modes of thought, LGBTQIA modes of thought. The radical feminist points out that an independent woman or a woman who does not seek out male approval is often charged with being a lesbian. Mainstream society then is seen as being infected with homophobia and heterosexism, and both of these serve to produce a system that reproduces discrimination for women. Homophobia in that society has a fear or a hatred or an extreme dislike of LGBT people and ways of being, and the heterosexism is supposedly superior to homosexuality. So the radical feminist then views the legal system as being patriarchal, and so much so that violence becomes against women is only partially criminalized. The effort to degrade women has become a popular form of male sport, that it's acceptable, that it's depicted as art. I gotta tell you that as I say this, I told you folks that I like boxing. I'm a boxing guy. Well, I wanted to show you that this famous boxer out of England, a guy named Billy Joe Sanders, he just lost his boxing license because this guy posted a video where he was talking about how, men and women are kind of, stuck in the house dealing with the corona situation, right? The quarantines. And he's in front of a heavy bag and he's effectively showing men how to hit their wife to make a nagging wife be quiet.
Oh, wow.
Like what? Right? And so, yeah. All right. I mean, I wish that would sound like I made that up just to prove my point, but I absolutely did not. You can see what he says right here. So the radical feminist, right? She looks at activity like this and says, what in the world? You can't incrementally change a society that's going to make a famous boxer. He's world famous, right? Ex-champ, world famous. And he's good too. That he's going to, post a video freely and just say things like this. All of a sudden you explode. And then he hits the heavy bag, bam, on the, come on. Anyway. All right. So that's the radical feminist. Let me show you something. Hold on, let me get a document. I want to show you. I was showing this to the earlier class, but let me show you guys something else. In line with the thought of the radical feminist, I want you to think about the writings of Zora Neale Hurston. Let me show this. Let me make it nice and big for you to see. Hopefully this isn't taking too long. All right. This is Zora Neale Hurston. And let me show you her picture. I've always thought that Zora Neale Hurston kind of looked like Queen Latifah, but right. So that's Zora Neale Hurston, right? She famously writes this book, Their Eyes Were Watching God. Zora Neale Hurston said, I am not tragically colored. There is no great sorrow dammed up in my soul, nor lurking behind my eyes. Zora Neale Hurston said, even in the helter-skelter skirmish that is my life, I have seen that the world is to the strong, regardless of a little pigmentation, more or less. No, I do not weep at the world. Zora Neale Hurston said, I am too busy sharpening my oyster knife. If she is sharpening her oyster knife, what is she out there looking? What do oysters have inside them? They have pearls. She says, no, I'm too busy searching for pearls to be worried about the tragedies of life, right? So the radical feminist says that you have to radically re-alter society. And in so doing, you have to radically alter yourself. Let's change focus and let's go not from the liberal feminist. Let's go away from the socialist feminist. Let's move differently from the radical feminist. And now we'll go to the diversity feminist. Diversity feminism criticizes what it considers to be the narrow focus of liberal feminism. Diversity feminism draws on the experience of women from multiple ethnic, racial, cultural, and international backgrounds. The diversity feminist opposes the privileging of any single ethnic, racial, cultural, or national perspective on women's issues. The diversity feminists emerged in part because a number of feminists viewed other forms of feminism, especially liberal feminism, as concerned with primarily articulating the interests of a narrow cross-section of women, and that cross-section being white middle-class women. The diversity feminist contends that when one takes a cross-cultural and an international approach to understanding women's issues, feminism then comes to be understood, excuse me, in a more inclusive and more multicultural terms. Let's read through the slide together. The diversity feminist then draws on the experiences of women from different cultural backgrounds. It emerged as a critique of liberal feminism, which was seen as being too focused on white middle-class women. The diversity feminist says that in racial terms, African American and Latina feminists hold that one must appreciate how their oppression blends both racial and ethnic discrimination. right? Interestingly, the African American feminist and the Latina feminists have been less likely to view the traditional family as an agent of oppression. Let's go back to that point. Remember, we saw in the writings of Mary Wollstonecraft that relationships are oppressive. Excuse me, that relationships are oppressive because it makes women fake weakness. It makes women feign as if they are inadequate partners in the relationship, but they're only doing so to build up the strength in their men. And so the fact that women have to act weaker than they actually are, the relationship itself is oppressive. And if women as a whole can't free themselves from that oppressive relationship, then they need not to be in that relationship, right? So the liberal feminists, at least some forms of it, say that families are oppressive. Marriage is an oppressive institution. We just showed a second ago that the radical feminist, let me show you this book again, if I can find it, right? Yeah, this book here, The Antisocial Family, they're arguing that families, or at least the nuclear family, is an oppressive institution, right? Because it's the nuclear family that actually reinforces and reproduces the oppression in current women, and then by socialization, it reproduces, oppression in women that are yet to come. So the diversity feminist then looks at these things and says, wait a minute, the traditional family is not an agent of oppression for African American and Latina households. The traditional family is essentially the primary entity that holds families together. Once you have a situation where families are being held together, then strong families produce strong communities. And so the diversity feminist says that once you have strong families producing strong communities, then you have a group of people that can organize themselves into a block that can fight the gender and the race and the class-based oppression that society has to offer. The diversity feminist then says the Anglo-feminist sees the family largely as a patriarchal entity isolated from other forms of social oppression. The diversity feminist sees this thought as exclusionary and myopic. The diversity feminist sees women's issues as having a wide variety across cultural and international lines. So when women can challenge patriarchy in the way that they each define as best to produce change for them, then this is seen as women taking power over their own lives in a way that best suits the circumstances self-defined by that woman. Mm-hmm. So if feminism looks to dictate to women how they are to fight patriarchy, then feminism itself would be seen to exhibit the very same exploitative tendencies as the patriarchy that they are fighting. If feminism is dictating terms to women and patriarchy is dictating terms to women, then the diversity feminist sees them both as being problematic. So diversity feminist holds that the feminism must acknowledge that in developing states, illiteracy and poverty are feminist issues. They both impede the power of women. And so let's look at the writings of Audre Lorde. Here is a picture of Audre Lorde. I'm using her as a good example of the diversity feminist. You folks will know Audre Lorde, the poet extraordinaire. Let me show you something that Audre Lorde said. Give me just a second to get my act together. So I hope I'm pressing the point. Hopefully you can see the clear difference between the liberal feminist, the socialist feminist, the radical feminist, and the diversity feminist. In the words of Audre Lorde. Audre Lorde says there's a need for a new frame of reference because she said, perhaps I am the face of one of your fears, right? Perhaps I am the face of one of your fears because I am a woman, because I am Black, because I am lesbian, because I am myself. a Black woman warrior poet doing my work. Come to ask you, are you doing yours? The diversity feminist, in the words of Audre Lorde, asking you, are you threatened because of my self-identity, because of who I am? I'm asking you, are you doing your work? Because I am doing my own. That's good stuff right there. All right, so in conclusion for the day, the main thing I want you to reflect on that text, right, is that the liberal feminist is looking to use, remember we looked at liberalism as an ideology, looking at the writings of John Locke, talking about people are born with certain rights to life, liberty, and the right to hold property. The liberal feminist says that there's something wrong with society because women are kept away from those very same rights that are supposed to be inalienable, right? And so the liberal feminist wants to reorder, wants to modernize, wants to change society, to inject women into that society in an equal form. Bell
You
Hooks,
say that again?
yeah, that the liberal feminist wants to change society so that, because society is keeping women away from their inalienable rights. So the liberal feminist wants women to be injected into society on an equal basis with men. That's the change that the liberal feminist wants to put forward. Okay, that's cool, right? All right, so Bell Hooks, though, one of the foremost feminist thinkers of the day, and today, like 2020, Bell Hooks says that this is a white supremacist capitalist patriarchal society. So a liberal feminism that wants to inject women into society on an equal footing will never be able to do so because society has, I'm getting warned by the Zoom room, that society has a racial, a class, along with a gender problem. And so that means that there's a need for the socialist feminist. The socialist feminist says that capitalism and patriarchy are mutually reinforcing, so you have to attack them both at the same time. The radical feminist says that men as a group have oppressed women, and the traditional family, in more times than not, is the agent of that oppression. So you have to challenge the gender binary. You have to adopt a form, let's say frames of reference that have been used by queer theorists, by LGBT theorists. And so they're looking to radically change the society, right? The radical feminist, you want to radically alter society. And then the diversity feminist says that a white woman can't tell a Black woman how to be a feminist. The diversity feminist says a Black woman in the United States can't even tell a Black woman, for example, in Nigeria, how to be a feminist, right? Because you have to be cross-cultural and international in your approach. So how can a Brazilian, it might be too, let's keep it in racial terms, right? That Latina feminists, African-American feminists, and white feminists both have to have the space to generate solutions to their problems on their own. And that's the way feminism does not become as oppressive as the patriarchy that they are looking to defeat. That is all I wanted to say about these forms of feminism. I'm going to end the recording here. So thanks for listening.